You know the Roosevelts, the Astors, Forbes, the names carved into marble at Yale and Harvard? What if I told you they all share one secret origin story, a fortune built on flooding an entire nation with hard drugs? This isn't some fringe conspiracy. It's documented history, buried under 2 centuries of reputation laundering. America's most celebrated dynasties made their millions trafficking opium into China. Millions became addicts. Entire communities collapsed. And these families used the blood money to build the institutions that still shape America today. Let me take you back to where it started. Early 1800s, Britain has a problem. They're hemorrhaging silver buying tea, silk, and porcelain from China. The Chinese don't want British goods, so Britain finds a product China will buy, even though it destroys lives. Opium, grown in British-controlled India, refined and smuggled into a country where it's already illegal. The margins? 400%, sometimes 500. Buy opium in India for $100, smuggle it past Chinese patrols, sell it for 500 or 600. High risk, but the profits made it irresistible, and American merchants wanted in. Here's why Americans dominated. Speed. American clipper ships were faster than anything the British had. Perfect for outrunning Chinese naval forces and delivering cargo to hidden coastal drop points. American captains would load up thousands of pounds of opium in India, sail to the Chinese coast, and anchor offshore. Chinese smugglers rowed out under cover of darkness, exchanged opium for silver, and the American ships never technically docked in Chinese ports. Plausible deniability. Silver poured back into American banks. This operation ran for decades, from the early 1800s straight through the 1840s, even after the Opium Wars. Millions of Chinese lives were destroyed. Their economy bled dry, and American families built empires. Let's start with the most shocking name. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the man on Mount Rushmore, the president who guided America through the Great Depression and World War II. His family wealth? Drug money. Warren Delano II, FDR's grandfather, went to China at 19. By 24, he was a partner at Russell and Company, the largest American opium dealer in China. Not just participating, dominating. For 13 years, Warren ran operations out of Canton, coordinating shipments, managing logistics, making millions. When he returned to the States, he built a 40-room mansion in New York, sent his kids to elite schools, lived like royalty. Then he lost money in the Panic of 1857. So what did he do? Went straight back to China, made another fortune. Smuggling opium, came home even richer. His daughter Sarah married James Roosevelt. Their son was Franklin. FDR grew up surrounded by wealth funded entirely by opium, private tutors, Harvard, political connections, every advantage. And here's the cruelest irony. In 1935, while sitting in the Oval Office, Roosevelt signed laws that expanded federal drug controls. The man whose family got rich selling narcotics to Chinese people spent his presidency criminalizing drugs for Americans. Now, let's talk about the Astors. John Jacob Astor, once the richest man in America. You've heard the story. He made his money trading furs, right? That's the sanitized version. The real money came from opium. Starting in 1800, Astor's ships made regular runs to China. His vessel, the Macedonian, carried Turkish opium, traded it for Chinese silver, then used that silver to buy furs, tea, and silk. The opium leg was what made the whole operation profitable. By 1840, Astor was worth $20 million. That's $500 million in today's money, most of it opium profits. His great-grandson, also named John Jacob Astor, died on the Titanic as one of the wealthiest men alive. That fortune? Built on Chinese addiction. The Astor name is everywhere now. Libraries, museums, university buildings, all funded by narcotics. Then there's Forbes. Yes, that Forbes. Malcolm Forbes, the magazine publisher and billionaire. Where did the family money start? Boston, early 1800s, opium ships to China. Robert Bennett Forbes and his brother John Murray Forbes worked directly with Russell and Company, the same firm Warren Delano ran. Robert captained clipper ships loaded with opium. John invested the profits into railroads and became one of Boston's richest men. Their descendants launched Forbes magazine. The family became American aristocracy. It all started with opium. And today, John Murray Forbes has statues in Boston, buildings named after him. The opium connection? Completely scrubbed from the record. The Perkins family. Thomas Handesid Perkins, known in Boston as T.H. Perkins, one of New England's wealthiest men, funded hospitals, schools, and asylums. How? Opium. He was a founding partner of Perkins and Company, which later merged with Russell and Company. Ran opium from Turkey and India into China for decades, made millions. Retired to Boston and transformed into a respected philanthropist. Yale's Perkins Fellowship. Opium money. The Perkins School for the Blind in Boston. Opium money. Thomas Perkins is celebrated as a great humanitarian. The drug trafficking that paid for everything, rarely mentioned. Now we get to the truly disturbing part. The Russell family. Samuel Russell founded Russell and Company in 1823. It became the dominant American opium firm in China. He made an enormous fortune, retired to Connecticut, and in 1832, his cousin William Huntington Russell co-founded Skull and Bones at Yale. Skull and Bones, the secret society that's produced presidents, Supreme Court justices, CIA directors, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, John Kerry, all members. The Russell family fortune that helped establish this society came directly from opium. Samuel Russell's money still funds Skull and Bones operations today. The most powerful secret society in America was built on Chinese suffering. The Cabot family, Boston Brahmins, old money, respected everywhere. Their wealth came from trading with China in the early 1800s. What did they trade? Opium. The Cabot name is all over Boston. Cabot House at Harvard, streets named Cabot. The opium connection is invisible. The Low family, Abiel Abbott Lowe, another prominent trader, ran clipper ships to China, made millions. His son Seth Lowe became president of Columbia University and mayor of New York City. The family donated money to build Lowe Memorial Library at Columbia, an Ivy League library funded by opium. Here's the pattern. American families go to China. They join or start opium firms. They make fortunes smuggling drugs. They return home. They invest in railroads, real estate, legitimate businesses. They become respectable. They fund universities, museums, libraries. They erase the opium chapter from their family histories. Their descendants become American royalty. And nobody talks about where the money came from. This wasn't small scale. By the 1830s, American firms controlled about 10% of the opium flowing into China. British companies controlled most of the rest, but Americans were major players. Russell and Company alone shipped thousands of chests annually. Each chest held about 140 pounds, year after year, industrial scale. A single successful voyage could return 4 to 500% profit. Ship captains and company owners became millionaires overnight. In 1830s money, that's billionaire territory today. And it continued for decades. Even after the Opium Wars, wars China fought specifically to stop the trade, American firms kept smuggling. They just got better at hiding it. Let me tell you what this did to China. By the 1830s, 10 to 12 million Chinese were addicted to opium, roughly 10% of the adult male population. The addiction was so widespread it crippled the economy. Silver that should have stayed in China was draining out to pay for drugs. The government tried to stop it. They appointed Commissioner Lin Zexu to end the trade. In 1839, Lin confiscated and destroyed 1,000 tons of British opium in Canton. Britain's response? War. The First Opium War, 1839 to 1842. Britain won. Forced China to sign the Treaty of Nanking. China had to pay reparations, open ports to British trade, and cede Hong Kong. The treaty didn't explicitly legalize opium, but it made enforcement impossible. The trade expanded. American firms benefited enormously because during the war, British firms couldn't operate. American companies like Russell and Company took over their business. After the war, both British and American smuggling resumed at even higher levels. The Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, happened for the same reason. China tried again to stop the trade. Britain and France went to war, forced China to legalize opium and open more ports. American firms profited again, during and after. The human cost in China was catastrophic. Millions addicted, families destroyed, the economy wrecked. But in Boston, New York, and Connecticut, American families were building mansions and founding universities. Here's the part that should enrage you. The same families that made fortunes selling opium then turned around and criminalized drugs for everyone else. In the early 1900s, America led the international movement to ban opium. The Hague Opium Convention of 1912, the Harrison Narcotics Act of 1914. America pushed global drug prohibition. Why? Because by then, American elites had already extracted their wealth. Chinese immigration to America meant opium dens were opening in American cities. The elites didn't want competition. They didn't want American workers getting addicted like Chinese workers had. And they certainly didn't want anyone connecting the dots back to their own fortunes. So they criminalized it, painted opium users as criminals and degenerates, and buried the history of how their families had mass-marketed the same drug to an entire nation. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose grandfather made millions in opium, signed some of the toughest drug laws in American history. The families that got rich from drugs spent the 20th century prosecuting and imprisoning people for drugs. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. And here's what makes it worse. The history has been systematically erased. Most Americans have no idea that the Delano, Astor, Forbes, Perkins, Russell, and Cabot families made their fortunes in opium. Go to the FDR Presidential Library. The Delano family's opium connection is mentioned in one tiny exhibit, downplayed as trade with China. Go to the Astor family history. Opium is barely mentioned. It's all furs and real estate. Forbes family history, railroads and magazines, not opium. Yale mentions Samuel Russell as a benefactor. The opium business that funded him? not mentioned. Harvard's Cabot House, named after the Cabot family. Their opium trading? Not in the official history. The whitewashing has been thorough and deliberate. These families used their wealth and influence to rewrite history. They donated to universities on the condition that certain facts were omitted. They controlled historical narratives through foundations and endowments. They made sure their descendants grew up never knowing the truth. But the evidence is undeniable. Shipping records, letters, account books, historical archives in China, Britain, and America. Researchers have documented it. Books have been written. The proof exists. But it's not taught in schools, it's not in the museums, and the families want to keep it that way. Because if people knew the truth, it would shatter their carefully crafted reputations. If the Delano family got rich selling drugs that destroyed millions of Chinese lives, how is FDR a hero? If the Forbes family made their fortune poisoning China, why do we celebrate Malcolm Forbes? If Yale's Skull and Bones was funded by opium money, what does that say about American elite institutions? The cognitive dissonance would be unbearable. So the truth stays buried. Here's the comparison they don't want you to make. In the 1980s and 90s, the CIA was implicated in allowing cocaine to flow into American inner cities to fund Contra rebels in Nicaragua. The crack epidemic destroyed black communities. When that story broke, there was outrage, investigations, admissions. Gary Webb, the journalist who exposed it, was destroyed professionally. But the story got out. People understood that the government had allowed drugs to devastate communities for political gain. Now apply that same logic to the 1800s. American families deliberately flooded China with opium for profit. Millions of Chinese lives destroyed. The Chinese economy crippled. And those families used the profits to build American institutions that still exist today. Where's the outrage? Where's the reckoning? Where's the accountability? There isn't any. Because the families that did it became so rich and powerful, they could rewrite history. They ensured their crimes were forgotten. And they made certain their descendants lived in luxury, never confronting what their ancestors did. Let's be clear about the scale. Conservative estimates suggest American firms made $50 to $100 million from the China opium trade between 1800 and 1860. That's in 1800s money. Adjusted for inflation, that's $1.5 to $3 billion today. And that's just the profits. The total value of the opium moved was many times higher. This wasn't small-time smuggling. This was industrial-scale drug trafficking, ships, warehouses, agents, bribes, a full logistical operation. The American firms involved employed thousands of people, Chinese middlemen, ship crews, Canton-based factors, Boston-based investors. It was a massive organized criminal enterprise. Except it wasn't considered criminal in America. It was business. And the men who ran it were celebrated as successful merchants and captains of industry. Here's the modern equivalent. Imagine if a group of American billionaires today were caught running a cartel that flooded Mexico with fentanyl. Millions of Mexicans addicted, hundreds of thousands dead. And these billionaires used the profits to endow Harvard, fund political campaigns, and build museums. Then, 150 years later, their descendants are presidents, senators, and university chancellors. And no one talks about where the original money came from. That's what happened with the opium families. Except we're the descendants living in the world they built, and we're not supposed to ask questions. In China, the Opium Wars are a core part of national identity. They call it the Century of Humiliation, the period when Western powers forced opium on China and carved up the country. It's taught in every school. Every Chinese person knows that Britain and America poisoned their country for profit. They know it led to colonization, wars, and millions of deaths. But in America, we don't teach it. Most Americans couldn't tell you what the Opium Wars were about. They certainly don't know American families got rich from it. And they definitely don't know those families still control enormous wealth and power today. And the contrast is staggering. China remembers and teaches what was done to them. America forgets and whitewashes what we did. And the families that profited are happy to keep it that way. So what do we do with this information? First, we tell the truth. The Delano, Astor, Forbes, Perkins, Russell, Cabot, and Lowe families made their fortunes selling opium to China. Millions of Chinese were addicted and died. The Chinese economy was devastated, and American families got rich enough to found dynasties. Second, we acknowledge the hypocrisy. The same families that made fortunes from drugs, then criminalized drugs for everyone else, they used their wealth to push prohibition while hiding their own drug trafficking history. Third, we question the institutions built with that money. Yale, Harvard, Columbia, museums, hospitals, foundations, all of them funded at least in part by opium money. Should they acknowledge that? Should there be reparations? Should the families that still benefit be held accountable? These are uncomfortable questions, but they need to be asked, because right now these families are still powerful. The Delanos, the Forbes, the Russells, the Cabots, they're still part of America's elite. They still hold wealth and influence that came from Chinese opium money. and they've never had to answer for it. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's family made their fortune selling drugs to China. The Astors built their empire on opium. Forbes magazine exists because of opium profits. Skull and Bones was funded by opium money. Harvard, Yale, and Columbia have buildings paid for with opium profits. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented history. The evidence exists in archives, letters, shipping records, and account books. Researchers have proven it. Books have been written. But the average American doesn't know because the story has been buried, whitewashed, erased from the official narrative, and the families that benefited don't want you to know. Because if you knew the truth, you'd realize that some of the most powerful, most respected, most influential families in American history are descended from drug traffickers. And the institutions they built, the universities, the foundations, the political dynasties, were all funded by poisoning millions of Chinese people. The truth is ugly, but it's the truth, and it's time people knew.